At 5:12 in the morning, the city woke up to the sound of the earth tearing itself apart. But what followed was even worse. Not the shaking, not the collapsing buildings, but the fire. A fire that would burn for 3 days, consume an entire city, and leave hundreds of thousands with nothing. Welcome to History Ledger. Tonight, we step into one of the most devastating disasters in American history. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake. A moment when the ground beneath San Francisco split apart, along the deadly San Andreas Fault. But this is not just the story of an earthquake. This is the story of what came after. A city unprepared, fire unstoppable, and a disaster that turned survival into something far more difficult than endurance. Because in 1906, San Francisco didn't just shake, it burned. And by the time it ended, more than 80% of the city would be gone. So dim the lights, and step back into the early morning darkness of April 18th, just moments before everything changes. In the early years of the 20th century, San Francisco stood as one of America's brightest cities. A place of ambition, dot of movement, dot of promise. Its streets climbed and fell with the hills, lined with elegant wooden homes painted in soft pastels and intricate detail. Cable cars clattered steadily along iron tracks, carrying workers, merchants, and dreamers from the waterfront to the heart of the city. Down at the harbor, ships arrived daily bringing goods, gold, and people chasing opportunity. The legacy of the gold rush still lingered in the air, not as chaos, but as confidence. San Francisco believed in itself. And why wouldn't it? By 1906, it had become the financial and cultural center of the American West. Banks were strong, businesses were thriving. The city was alive with energy restaurants, theaters, newspapers, and the constant hum of progress. But beneath this beauty, beneath the noise and motion, something unseen. Watered far, below the streets, deep within the earth's crust, lay a fracture. Along restless boundary known as the San Andreas Fault. It stretched for hundreds of miles across, California's silent line dividing massive sections of the Earth's surface. For years, it had remained quiet, but not still. The ground here did not rest. It pressed. It strained. It built tension slowly, invisibly, patiently. No one in San Francisco could feel it. There were no warnings. No alarms. No signs in the sky. Just another ordinary day, fading into night. As April 17th, 1906 came to an end, the city began to sleep. Gas lamps flickered softly along the streets. Windows dimmed, one by one. The sounds of conversation and footsteps gave way to silence. Families settled into their homes. Workers rested after long shifts. Children slept peacefully, unaware of anything beyond their dreams. The city exhaled, and for a few quiet hours, everything was still. In the early morning darkness of April 18th, San Francisco was at its most vulnerable. Most of its people were asleep. The streets were empty. Even the harbor had grown quiet. It was 5:12 a.m., and in that single moment, the earth moved. At first, it was subtle, a faint trembling beneath the ground, like the passing of a distant train. Something small enough to stir light sleepers, but not yet enough to alarm. Then it grew. The trembling became shaking. The shaking became violence. The ground began to lurch, not side to side, but in waves, twisting, buckling beneath the city. Buildings groaned. Glass shattered. Walls cracked open like paper. People were thrown from their beds as the world around them began to collapse. The rupture had begun along the San Andreas Fault, and it was not small. The earth itself was tearing apart for hundreds of miles. But in these first seconds, the people of San Francisco did not know. They only knew fear. Chandeliers swung wildly from ceilings. Furniture slid across floors. Entire facades of buildings broke loose and crashed into the streets below. Sound was overwhelming, a mixture of grinding stone, collapsing wood, and human voices rising in panic. Some ran, some froze, some never had the chance to react at all. The city that had stood so proud just moments before was now breaking. Streets split open. Railway tracks twisted into impossible shapes. Brick buildings crumbled, sending clouds of dust into the air. Even the strongest structures could not resist the force beneath them. And still, it continued, not for seconds, but for nearly a full minute, in disasters, time stretches. A single moment can feel endless, and for those caught in the shaking, this minute felt like a lifetime. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shaking slowed. The violent motions softened, and finally, it stopped. Silence followed, but it was not peace. The city lay, stunned, broken, unrecognizable in places. Survivors stumbled out into the streets barefoot, shaken, covered in dust. They looked around, trying to understand what had just happened. Homes were gone. Buildings had collapsed into piles of debris. Familiar streets no longer looked familiar. And yet, in this moment, many believed the worst was over. They were wrong. Because beneath the rubble, another danger had already begun to spread. Invisible, unstoppable, and far more destructive than the earthquake itself. Fires. Gas lines, shattered by the shaking, had begun to leak. Small flames ignited in kitchens, in businesses, and broken pipes beneath the streets. At first, they manageable, even insignificant. But the city's lifelines had been destroyed. Water mains were broken. Pipes had cracked, open beneath the ground. The systems designed to fight fire no longer worked. And as the first flames began to grow, San Francisco stood defenseless. What began as a natural disaster was about to become something far worse. Not just a city shaken, but a city consumed. At 5:12 in the morning, the illusion of safety was gone. What had begun as a tremor was now a full rupture of the earth itself. Beneath San Francisco, the ground was no longer stable, it was alive. The fault line had snapped. Along the vast length of the San Andreas Fault, the earth's crust tore open with immense force. Sections of land shifted violently, some by as much as 20 feet. Fences were ripped apart. Roads were displaced. Entire landscapes changed shape in seconds. The earthquake, now estimated at a magnitude of nearly 7.8, was one of the most powerful in North American history, but numbers could not capture its reality. Because this was not just an event, it was an experience. Inside homes, chaos unfolded instantly. People were thrown against walls. Ceilings collapsed without warning. Doors jammed shut as frames twisted under pressure. In some buildings, the upper floors pancaked downward, crushing everything beneath them. Others leaned at impossible angles, before giving way completely. Outside, the streets became deadly. Bricks and debris rained from above. Telegraph poles snapped like matchsticks. Streetcars derailed, their iron frames twisted into wreckage. The familiar became dangerous. The solid became uncertain. Some tried to run. But where could they go when the ground itself could not be trusted? Eyewitnesses would later describe the sensation as if the earth were rolling like the ocean. Not a single direction. Not a single motion. But waves falling and breaking beneath their feet. For nearly a minute, this continued. And in that minute, thousands of lives were changed forever. Hospitals filled instantly, those that still stood. Doctors worked in the open air, treating the injured with limited supplies. Many had lost their homes. Some had lost their families. And some had lost everything. Communication collapsed almost immediately. Telegraph lines were down. Rail lines were damaged beyond use. San Francisco was suddenly isolated, cut off from the outside world. No one could call for help. No one could report what had happened. The city was alone. In the business districts, the destruction was overwhelming. Large stone and brick buildings, symbols of wealth and permanence, had proven fragile. Walls split apart. Facades collapsed into the streets. Heavy safes crashed through floors as entire structures gave way. In poorer neighborhoods, the devastation was just as severe. Wooden homes, though more flexible, were no match for the intensity of the shaking. Entire rows of houses shifted off their foundations. Some collapsed instantly. Others stood, but barely, and everywhere. There was dust. A thick cloud of it rose into the air, turning morning into a dim gray haze. It filled lungs. It blurred vision. It carried with it the smell of broken earth and splintered wood. Survivors moved through it, slowly like shadows. Calling out names, searching through debris, hoping for answers, and fearing what they might find. Then came the aftershocks. Smaller tremors followed the main quake, each one a cruel reminder that the danger had not passed. Each one threatening to bring down what little still stood. Each one renewing panic. People refused to go back inside buildings. They gathered in open spaces, parks, streets, empty lots, anywhere that felt even slightly safer. But safety was an illusion, because while the ground had begun to settle, something else had already begun to rise. Across the city, small fires were appearing. In kitchens, where stoves had been knocked over. In factories, where machinery had sparked. In the hidden network beneath the streets, where gas lines had ruptured and leaked into the open air. At first, they were scattered, unconnected, almost manageable. Firefighters responded quickly, those who could. They arrived with hoses and equipment, ready to act, ready to contain the damage. But when they turned the valves, nothing came. The earthquake had destroyed the water system. Main pipes had burst beneath. The streets, hydrants, ran dry. Reservoirs could not deliver. The city had no water. And without water, there was no way to fight the flames. What could have been controlled now began to spread. One fire became several. Several became dozens. And slowly, they began to merge. The wind carried embers from one building to another. Flames leapt across streets. Roofs ignited. Entire blocks caught fire within minutes. Still, many believed it would pass. That the fires would burn out. That help would come. But help was not coming. Not yet. Because, beyond the city, no one fully understood what had happened. And within it, the worst was still ahead. The earthquake had broken San Francisco, but it had not destroyed it. That task would fall to the fire. A fire that would burn for days. A fire that would not be stopped. A fire that would turn devastation into total ruin. The earthquake had passed, but the disaster had only begun. Across San Francisco, fires were spreading. What started as scattered flame, small, isolated, almost forgettable, had now become something far more dangerous. Uncontrolled. Unstoppable. Gas lines, shattered beneath the streets, continued to leak fuel into the air. Each spark, each open flame, fed the growing inferno. Entire buildings ignited within minutes. Wooden homes, so beautiful, just hours before became fuel. Dry timber, paint, and fabric turned into kindling. The city was burning. Firefighters did what they could. They rushed from one blaze to another, dragging hoses through broken streets, desperate to contain the spread. But the truth was unavoidable. There was no water. The earthquake had destroyed the very system designed to fight Fire hydrants stood useless. Pipes lay cracked beneath the earth. Reservoirs could not reach the flames. So the fires grew. By midday, multiple fires had merged into vast walls of flame. They moved with the wind. They leaped across streets. They climbed buildings and consumed entire blocks. Smoke filled the sky. Thick. Dark. Endless. Sun itself disappeared behind a turning day into something dim and unnatural. Ash began to fall like snow. Soft. Silent. Relentless. People fled with whatever they could carry. Suitcase. A photograph. A single piece of their lives. Others carried nothing at all. They simply ran. Families moved toward open spaces, parks, fields, anywhere the fire had not yet reached. Many gathered in what would become vast refugee camps, including the open grounds near what we now know as a gate park. Tents were erected. Blankets laid across the ground. Thousands of people suddenly homeless waited. In uncertainty, behind them, their city burned. In a desperate attempt to stop the fire, officials made a dangerous decision. If the flames could not be extinguished, perhaps they could be contained. The plan was simple. Destroy buildings in the fire's path, create fire breaks, leave nothing for the flames to consume. Soldiers were brought in, explosives were distributed, and across the city, controlled destruction began. Buildings were dynamited. Entire blocks were reduced to rubble, intentionally. But the plan did not go as expected. Many of the explosions ignited new fires instead of stopping the spread. They accelerated it. The inferno grew even stronger. For 3 days, the fire burned day and night, without pause, without mercy. Neighborhood after neighborhood disappeared. Homes, businesses, landmarks all. Consumed. More than 80% of San Francisco was destroyed. The scale of loss was unimaginable. Official reports at the time would claim a few hundred deaths. But later estimates would reveal the truths had perished. Some trapped beneath collapsed buildings, others overtaken by the flames, and many never identified at all. By the time the fire finally began to fade, there was little left to save. The once great city was now a landscape of ash brick chimneys, stood alone among ruins. Twisted, metal-marked where buildings once stood. Entire streets had vanished, their paths barely recognizable beneath the debris. And yet, among the destruction, life-remained survivors moved through the ruins, slowly, searching, recovering what little they could, helping one another. There was grief. There was silence. But there was also something else. Resilience. In the refugee camps, people began to rebuild their lives in small ways. Meals were shared. Shelter was offered. Communities formed again, not in buildings, but in spirit and beyond the city. Help finally began to arrive. News of the disaster spread across the nation. Supplies were sent. Aid was organized. Support came from near and far. San Francisco was no longer alone. In time, plans were made. Not just to rebuild, but to rebuild stronger. New building codes. Improved infrastructure. A city designed not just for beauty, but for survival. The scars would remain. But so would the memory. The memory of a morning when the earth shook without warning. The memory of a fire that would not stop. And the memory of a city that refused to disappear. Because San Francisco did not end in 1906. It endured, and from its ashes, it rose again. When the flames finally died, San Francisco was no longer the city it once was. its streets erased. Hits, homes, gone, its skyline reduced to ash and silence. But the story does not end in destruction, because from those ashes, something remarkable happened. People stayed. They rebuilt. They refused to let the city disappear. Within just a few years, San Francisco began to rise again, stronger, wiser, and forever changed. The San Francisco earthquake was not just a disaster. It was a turning point. A reminder that even when everything is lost, human resilience remains. If you found this story powerful, there's another one waiting for you. A story just as intense, just as forgotten, and just as real. So don't leave yet. Subscribe to History Ledger for more true stories that shaped our world, told in calm voices, but carrying the weight of history. And until the next story, rest. And remember,